The main monitor flashed, "This area has already been secured," in block white letters, while Officer Mara Ellis screamed over the live feed.
"Move civilians now! Clear the steps!"
Suspicion sat at the base of his ribs as the control operator watched the overlay refuse to shrink. He kept his hand on the console, thumb finding the worn mic switch, and he breathed in measured counts the way training taught him to steady his voice. The contradiction was not a small mismatch. It arrived as an active threat. One authoritative command claimed safety, while another demanded flight. That mismatch became the central problem the operator had to resolve before anyone made the wrong move. He had been a control operator for 19 years. He knew the shapes of protocol by touch, where the feed logs hid, how to roll back overlays, how to escalate to Supervisor Hale. He also knew what an overlay that did not obey the system meant for civilians watching. Misplaced trust. His suspicion hardened into action as he tapped the archive ribbon and pulled the insertion log. He called, "Hale, roll history now." His voice was flat, precise. It carried the compulsion of someone who could not walk away without finishing a task. "Operator 7, hold your channel." Supervisor Hale replied over a dry line. "We have evacuation orders from field." "Do not," he cut off when a second voice bled into the control room line. "Ramirez, there's corruption on feed 5. Static coalesces into a shape. I'm isolating patch. Prepare to override." Ramirez's words were short, technical. The operator listened for degree of trust in each syllable and found none. On the street feed, Mara's camera leaned over a flooded curb. Civilians clutched umbrellas and grocery bags, faces turned white under sodium lamps. "Mrs." Donovan shouted a name and slapped at a wet sleeve. A dog crouched at a storefront threshold, ears flat, refusing to move. The operator watched the dog's silhouette under the crut phosphor bloom and felt the second shift, from suspicion to urgency. He keyed the mic, and his mouth opened to read the directive as protocol demanded, but his hand hesitated on a line of old training. When ground reports contradict automated overlays, verify first. Mara, confirm status of civilians. "Mara, confirm," he said into the mic, letting the word suspicion inform the clipped cadence. Mara's feed broke. Audio cracked and then returned with shorter phrases. "Control, there's debris. Shoe at the curb, child's shoe. I'm pulling the parent away." Her sentences came in breathy bursts now. The recorder showed her movement in jerks, a half-second behind the video. The operator watched the overlay stay fixed, declaring safety over a picture of people running. He pulled the earlier insertion log and found the secured banner stamped in 3 hours earlier with Supervisor Hale's approval code. That entry should have been inert metadata. It was active, live. The operator felt the first real emotion he would later name for himself. Suspicion of manipulation, not system error. He voice checked again. "Ramirez, run signal integrity on feed 5. Pull a frame buffer. If you see patterning, flag it to me immediately." Ramirez answered. "Frame buffer engaged." "There's cohesion in the static." The operator heard the word cohesion and made a choice to treat it as threat rather than glitch. Mara moved through the intersection with her duty jacket reflecting red patch strips. She skirted around an overturned stroller and crouched to a parent on wet steps. "Mrs. Donovan, you need to come with me now," she said. "Come on now, Mrs." Donovan's voice broke. My boy's upstairs." She pointed toward municipal steps slick with rain. Mara looked up and paused. She flicked her radio to the console channel and said, "Control, there's ritual debris on the steps. Candles. Symbols." Her words stumbled on the transmission and reappeared as a single pixel smear. The operator found Ramirez's isolated zoom. Ramirez had zoomed the feed until a blot of analog noise resolved into a sigil, a ring of crossed strokes like tattooed tally marks pressed into the static. The operator leaned forward. He pressed his finger to the scar on his cheek without thinking, a micro gesture that steadied him. He allowed to the empty control room. "This is no longer cosmetic." That was the first emotion shift out loud. Suspicion darkening into alarm. Supervisor Hale argued back on the private line. "Operator 7, you are reading too much into," he said. "We must preserve public calm. If we retract the secured banner now, we'll cause a stampede." "Hold the overlay." The operator heard the calculation in Hale's voice and contradicted it with hands on logic. "Hale, I'm seeing a pattern that resolves into a half-formed figure. Ramirez verifies shape. Mara says debris in a child's shoe. We cannot keep telling people it's secure while those images persist. The exchange became a short confrontation. Hale's tone measured. The operator's tone clipped by training. Operator 7, you have no authority to override Supervisor Hale. Hold protocol. Hale replied, hold protocol and stand down. The operator could hear the abrasion of authority against field reports. He pushed further. Ramirez streamed the isolated buffer to the secondary monitor. Full contrast. No overlay. Ramirez confirmed, and the buffer came up. The sigil tightened, then broke into a masked outline. A second twist arrived. The masked outline resolved into a human shape for a fraction of a second, mouth open but no words transmitted. Mara's voice sharpened on the intercom. Control, do you see this? There's a figure at the top of the steps. It's not moving like a person. Its static swallowed the rest. The operator watched the live frame as Mara moved toward the threshold, the dog staying crouched and a parent reaching out. He felt responsibility close, like a weight. He had to make a decision. Obey Supervisor Hale and preserve an overlay that implied safety, or support Mara and risk chaos. He chose to follow the feed logic rather than the archival seal. He issued an override for an emergency rolling advisory that would only insert if field confirmation arrived. He keyed the mic and said, Control to Mara. Do not approach unknown figure. Maintain distance. Mara, pull back. His voice was flat, the procedural timbre he kept when the system demanded calm. Mara answered immediately, her breath ragged. Control, I'm pulling the parent now. Dog won't move. Control, I'm taking the dog. I'm taking it. She moved despite orders on the overlay. The operator could see her hands in the feed, the way she tipped her weight to lift the dog. He watched her commit a personal breach of standing orders. That action changed the direction of the scene. It forced the operator into a conflict between protocol and human rescue. Mara, Hale's voice cracked on the private line, sharp now. Do not, Mara, do not extract. This is an active command from Central. Stand down. Mara's radio stuttered. Hale, if that banner is wrong, people will die. I'm going in. The conversation turned into a short string of rapid lines. Mara, you will endanger yourself. Hale, Control, I am not leaving them here. Mara. Stand down now. Hale, Mara, move now, the operator added. The exchange contained 3 distinct voices and 6 short lines, an argument that forced a decision. The operator's suspicion curdled into urgency. He keyed a private log, stamping the entry. Override requested. Field extraction in progress. He could not erase the old insertion stamp, only annotate it. Ramirez's voice came through quieter. Operator, the static isn't random. It coheres to a sigil. When we desaturate, the figure appears, commanding the overlay. It's repeating the phrase from the banner in subcarrier tones. The operator's hands went flat on the desk. He did not use metaphors. He read the audio file and described the frequency overlay as an amplitude, modulated subcarrier that matched the character spacing of the banner. The machine facts made the threat specific. On the street feed, Mara reached the municipal steps and the dog leaned into her legs, jaw working but refusing to obey. She put her hand on the dog's collar and tugged. The dog did not move. Mrs. Donovan knelt and tried to pick up the child's shoe and cry. Her eyes were wet with rain. Mara turned toward the operator's channel and said, Control, I see the emblem bleed. It's on the stone. It's stamped here. I can blow it off. I can... A glitch swallowed her next words. She hesitated in image and then reappeared further down the steps, as if the feed had cut and rejoined. The operator felt a new shift under his skin. Urgency sliding into a hollow dread. He called Ramirez by name. Ramirez, freeze on the emblem. Increase shutter. We need to capture texture. Ramirez obeyed. The emblem sat in the cropped frame like a pressed coin of rain, dark stone. Ramirez toggled high gain and the emblem snapped into a quasi-stenciled crest, an eye-shaped bleeding signal read into grey stone. The operator told himself aloud, this is not a human pattern. It is inserted, saying it made the danger actionable. Mara reached the top of the steps, despite orders. The overlay stayed on screen word by word, asserting security as if to contradict her boots on stone. She crouched and looked past the emblem. Control, there's nothing there now. The stairwell's empty. Her voice flipped. Apology, confusion, Control. Where did they go? Mrs. Donovan, where is he? The operator watched the live footage and counted fragments of movement. A smear, an absence where the parent had been. He saw Mara's shoulders do something small. She breathed out and then tried to call the parent's name. The climb to climax quickened. Ramirez announced a discovery. Operator, the static pattern is repeating. Each repetition grows the secured banner's field. When it expands, video pixels where people stood go silent. They desynchronize, then vanish. The operator felt the ground of his certainties fall away. He could not accept a policy that asked him to ignore live disappearance. He made a call he was not supposed to. He issued a hard withdrawal override for field units. Mara, get back now. Repeat, back off the steps. Retreat to perimeter 2. He heard her swear a short raw line, then she answered, copy, control. Retracting, her feed jerked. In split screen the monitor showed the banner expanding. First over the steps, then folding across the street. The parent, the child's shoe, and the dog stuttered and then dissolved into the crut bloom as white phosphor blood where bodies had been. The operator watched Mara freeze in the frame, and then her image stuttered into a pale gap. He felt a physical reaction, cold pressure under his sternum, his mouth dry. He could not feel the shape of fear as a metaphor. He felt the muscle tensing in his jaw, the tape of his breath going shallow, the rhythm of his finger tapping the console faster. That counted as emotional evidence. Concrete bodily response. Then the secured banner widened into absolute assertion across the feed. Where movement had been, nothing remained but a warped wash of signal. The operator's voice dropped to a procedural monotone he used when recordings were official, control to all units. Withdraw to 40 meters. Do not cross the overlay. He toggled the incident flag to sealed despite the unresolved tag he added earlier. Supervisor Hale's line went silent for 2 heartbeats, then returned. Brittle, Operator 7, Hale, we are sealing the primary feed. Log this as already secured. Close incident, the operator resisted. Hale, did you author that banner insertion at 3:02? Hale, I approved a rollback earlier. This is for public stability, it's for containment. The operator pushed back, his voice low. Containment of what, Hale? People were on that step a minute ago. Mrs. Donovan, he stopped himself to keep sentences short and clear. The final collapse came without melodrama. The monitor froze on a warped emblem as the secured banner filled the frame. The operator watched a live pixel grid swallow figures in real time. One after another, human movement ceased. The dog that had not budged remained. Then it broke into horizontal jitter and resolved into a white bloom before the monitor smeared to black. The control room lights hummed. Ramirez whispered, we lost them. The operator's mouth stayed set. He stood and walked to the private terminal, where he began a dry procedural log in first order lines. Time stamps, feed ids, actions taken. He closed the public channel and looped a terse standby message that matched the template. Neutral voice, calm words, a directive to await further instruction. He then opened a private file and recorded what the public record would not allow. Frames of the emblem, Ramirez's notes on subcarrier modulation, and Mara's last visible movement. He wrote a line and signed it with his operator id out of habit. He set the file to private and stamped it with the phrase the system would accept. Already secured, he did not call it closure, he called it containment. He still had suspicion, which had turned to urgency and then to a tight, scientific dread. He pulled the analog headset from its hook and ran his thumb over the scratched glass of his wristwatch. He listened to the empty control room breathe, and then keyed the console for a private message to Mara's unit. There was no reply. The feed showed a looping frame of an empty stair, the emblem centered, and the banner scrolling. Ramirez's voice announced low, signal loop active. Hard cutoff scheduled. The operator recorded the cutoff time and let his hand hover over the mic for a moment longer than necessary. Then he executed the hard cutoff. After the hard cutoff, he began the private, compulsive work of a man who could not let images evaporate without accounting. He archived the buffers, annotated every frame with timestamps, and flagged anomalies for forensic review. He wrote one line in the private log that he would not read aloud. Permission to override had been denied twice before the erasures. He set the audio to loop and listened for the embedded phrase, already secured, again and again until it resolved into a mechanical shape he could analyze. He could not reconcile method and outcome. The evidence showed a human shape briefly visible inside static, a sigil pressed into stone, an overlay that acted like a command beyond command. He labeled the incident anomalous insertion and closed the file, but he also left an unsubtle note on the desk. Mara Ellis, Field Larson last visible at municipal steps, extraction attempted. He wrote Ramirez's name in the margin as witness and Supervisor Hale as command. He did not add his own name beyond the operator code. Night rolled toward an exhausted dawn. The municipal feeds returned to technical checks, engineers murmured, but the operator stayed at his console. He ran one final playback and watched the sequence frame by frame. Overlay insertion at 3:02, Mara approaching at 3:12, emblem recorded at 3:14, disappearance at 3:15. The sequence was concrete and cruel. He felt a final shift. Urgency settled into a kind of bleak resolve. He would not let the record be a comfort to anybody. He took one action that could not be easily reversed. He duplicated the private log to an off-system drive, hid it inside an encrypted container, and labeled it only if, so that if the public record read that the area remained secured, someone with curiosity could find the evidence. He left the control room with the headset hung over his shoulder and the private drive tucked in a pocket. The city outside smelled of wet asphalt and ozone. He walked past the municipal steps on his way out and stopped at the caution tape. No investigators remained at the barrier, the tape sagged. He touched the tape with a finger and felt cold moisture. The emblem was not present where he stood, only worn stone and rain. He did not trust his eyes. He walked away, carrying the evidence he could not share. His final recorded entry that night was a line of protocol and a private note. Incident sealed as already secured. Private evidence preserved. Await further orders. He left the control room lights low. The public feed looped the banner one last time, the words making a promise. Outside, somewhere behind doors and down stairways, something had erased people. He could not fix the fact. All he could do was ensure the record existed in a hidden place. The last action of the chapter was small and concrete. He locked the off-system drive in the glove compartment of his car and tossed the keys into an envelope addressed to Ramirez with a short line. "Find this if the banner grows again." He walked to his car and pressed the trunk closed. The sound was definite. That mechanical click became the chapter's closing beat, an action that named choice and consequence rather than a reflection. The feed remained as it always had. A steady loop of reassurance layered over absence. Mara yanked a child's arm and shoved him toward the nearest bus as the ease banner blinked and all, clear over the civic plaza. Suspicion sat under her ribs. She tasted metal and rain and did not trust the white block letters refusing to change. Sirens still keened at the perimeter. A woman at the top of the steps froze because the overlay read the square was safe. Mara did not let people freeze. She pushed. Mara's hands were damp in her gloves. She barked names into her radio. Move, move. Thomas, open the rear hatch. Officer Mara Ellis did not say the word leave as a suggestion. She said it as an order that must be followed now. Her voice tightened when a child on the first bus started to cry, and an older man backed away from the stairs, eyes locked on the banner. Mara felt the shape of the problem in concrete terms. The public display said one thing while the loudspeakers said another. That contradiction was the danger. She had seen it once before that night. Earlier, the control room had pushed an overlay that declared the area secure while someone else screamed orders for immediate evacuation on live feed. The memory arrived as an exact set of images. The monitor with white block letters, the control operator's thumb hovering over the console, Mara's shouted plea to clear the steps. That earlier mismatch had made her suspicious of the system's honesty. She used suspicion like a tool. Check the override, verify the route, watch people for hesitation. A bus horn answered Thomas from the depot. "Thomas, get them moving." Mara into the radio. Thomas's voice came back thin. They were not leaving. That banners got half the plaza sitting down. Mara ran up the steps, boots hitting wet concrete. She shoved at a man who had another man's hand clamped on his arm. The man looked at the banner and then at Mara and let himself be guided. The first emotion shift happened in the space of a minute. Suspicion hardened into practical doubt. Mara doubted that a single process could both command and betray simultaneously. She called the control room. "Control, this is Mara. Which directive is authoritative?" A patchy reply answered. The control operator's voice was flat. "We are trying to clear the overlay." Standby. That pause widened into a gap of actions that Mara could not ignore. She started making choices that assumed the overlay might lie. At the bus depot, Lane cradled her small terrier and refused the strap of a volunteer who offered to carry the dog up the ramp. The terrier pressed its muzzle into her wrist and whined, "It won't go in, Mrs. Lane, he's not." She stopped because the dog had turned its head mid-cry and fixed on the street below, ears flattened. Mara watched the dog's shoulders bunch. The animal would not climb the step. Mara's mouth went dry. A CCTV bank began to twitch on a wall, mounted monitor above the ticket booths. Ramo's feed flickered between angles and a masked white figure stood in different frames at once. People near the monitors took a step back. The second emotion shift rippled through Mara then. Doubt became sharp fear. She tightened her grip on the radio and said, "Ramos, lock that feed." "Where's that silhouette coming from?" Ramo's voice, clipped and breathy, answered, "It's on every camera, it's copied." "I can't isolate the process." That last word, process, made Mara look past the crowd to the steps where chalk had begun to appear earlier. A ring of irregular marks scraped into damp stone. A mayor's aide appeared at the control room doorway, hair slick from rain, voice small as she demanded the all clear. Jenna Klein's hand pressed to the badge on her jacket. "We have to calm people. Jenna, we can't have a mass panic." Broadcast the secured message. Inside the control room, the control operator hesitated, thumb finding the console's edge. He sounded like someone reciting protocol. "Broadcast will be updated when authorization is confirmed." His pauses were precise. Mara heard the language of a man trying to keep procedure standing between people and whatever the monitors had started to show. People argued at the bus doors. "The screen says safe," one man told Mara. "The mayor said it's cleared." Mara looked at his face. He had sweat streaks under his collar. She recognized a pattern in that face. The way someone chooses to believe a public text when fear would force them to move. "Mara, listen to me. The banner is lying. Get on the bus now." He hesitated. Mara pinched his sleeve. The man moved. At the steps, the terrier pulled its owner back. Mrs. Lane's voice cracked. "I can't. He won't." She glanced at Mara, then at the dog, then up at the white letters on the plaza screen. Mara moved between the dog and the steps, kneeling so she could be at eye level. She put a gloved hand on the dog's flank and felt the muscles ripple. The animal was alert to something at the stair edge. Mara's jaw set. She, in a low voice, "Stay with me. Keep him. Don't let anyone go up there until we clear it." The dog did not relax. The third external event came as the overlay shifted its wording mid-sentence, morphing from a calming statement into a directive that redirected evacuees toward the steps. People obeyed the new text instinctively. A handful of evacuees stood and walked toward the stairwell as if pulled by a magnet.
Mara shouted, "No!"
The word broke across the plaza, "Don't go up there!" 3 people halted. One man kept walking. "Officer," Mara sprinted after him. "Hey! Stop!" she called. He turned his head but did not look scared. His mouth opened as if to answer an instruction, and then he stepped into the chalk circle and vanished between frames. It happened as a camera feed hiccuped. A spit of static, a vertical smear, the man stepping and then nothing. Mara reached for empty air. Ramos threw himself against the CCTV console in the control room. He's gone from camera 3. Ramos, camera 4 shows only negative space where he was. The timestamps don't match. The control operator's fingers flew. He pulled logs and scrolled lines of code written like a script that had inserted itself into the systems. "Something pushes commands from an internal process," he said. "It's writing overlays. It's writing route directives." That was the twist. The institution itself was being used against them. Jenna Klein demanded answers. "Who wrote that overlay?" she asked. Her voice stiffened and never let up. The control operator did not have an author to name. I don't know who started it. The right is local. It appears as self-authenticated." Jenna's face paled. She took a step back and then forward, forcing a new posture, broadcast the all, clear again, and then an announcement to move to the alternate route. The control operator clenched his jaw and did what he could. He tried to transmit a clarifying message that told people to ignore the secured overlay and use the marked guarded exit. The system ignored him. A fourth external event. Across multiple feeds, the white masked silhouette duplicated itself and stood on the municipal steps just outside camera range. A dog on a bus yelped and flattened to the floor, teeth bared at nothing. Bus driver Thomas swore and slammed the brake. Mara, the dog won't come up. It keeps looking at the steps. It's like it knows. His sentence cut off when a young mother on board looked out and began to tremble. "He's gone," she said. My brother just stepped off and her voice broke. Mara moved with authority. She had been trained to treat public text as an adjunct to command, but training did not cover a display that contradicted its own speakers. She ordered volunteers to mark a single egress, a narrow service lane with cones and a red marker flag. She made a visible rule and a visible path this way. She told survivors, pointing single line, keep dogs on the ground. No one goes to the steps. She clapped hands and shoved the line forward. People obeyed some and argued with others. That argument became the fifth external event when a group of 3 obeyed the overlay instead and walked toward the chalked stair edge. Rapid dialogue collapsed into a tense exchange between Mara and a man in that group. Stop. Mara yelled, Frank, stop now. Mara, it's saying go up there. Frank answered, the city told us so. Mara took his wrist and twisted, hard enough that he cursed. Frank, you re-choosing the text over your skin. Which will you trust, me or this screen? Frank blinked, then moved away from the steps. Mara released him and inhaled raggedly. The physicality of that moment turned the fear into something she could work on. Back in the control room, Technician Ramos worked through camera grids and found a loop. The secured overlay looped cross feeds from a local process that wrote to Jupu memory. Ramos stared at the line of code that kept implanting the overlay. He typed, then stopped, then typed again. He allowed, it's not network-born, it's local. It's compiling itself from a seed on municipal hardware. The control operator made a decision. He pull power from redundant nodes. Isolate the server bay. That order moved them into action. They were trying to sever the hands that wrote the lies. The climax arrived in the server bay where heat and humming racks filled the room. Ramos and the control operator stood over a console as the overlay scrolled across the bulkhead monitor and wrote its own instructions. Ramos' fingers shook. Someone or something is writing policies into the emergency override table. The control operator's face drew taut. He keyed an emergency pull that should have severed the local process. Servers refused to go down. A warning light blinked red. Then the feed on the bulkhead collapsed like a shutter and multiple cameras went dark in sequence. That blackout was the chapter's peak. Institution compromised, the systems failing at the exact moment survivors depended on them most. An argument happened under the bulkhead light. Jenna Klein demanded public control broadcast the alternate route now, she said. The control operator replied, we can't, the right persists. It remaps as soon as we cut power. Ramos added, we can reroute power, but the process mirrors itself to any node that comes online. Jenna slammed her palm on the counter, then tell officers on the ground to ignore all screens and move people manually. She looked at the control operator and then at Mara's live feed, where Mara stood on the steps, palms empty, shouting over a loudspeaker. Mara's voice cut through the radio. Listen to me! Ignore the screen. Use the marked lane now. Do not go to the steps. Her words were sharp, underpinned by the physical rhythm of someone who had already lost people. The fifth emotion shift moved through her then. Fear reshaped into a mechanical acceptance. She stopped waiting for the institution to be trustworthy and decided to make small, immediate rules that people could follow even if technology lied. She started clapping a cadence to move the line, touching shoulders to guide, holding dogs and lifting small children. A sudden event altered understanding. Ramos found an entry in the right log with a municipal seal embedded in its header, but the signature was corrupted, like a seal stamped in red wax and then smudged. The log showed a user ID that matched a maintenance process, but originated from a local USB key inserted earlier that night by an unlogged technician. The twist was personal. The right used legitimate local credentials. Jenna Loud, who had access to that key. The control operator looked to Ramos and said, it wasn't in our chain of custody. Someone else put it in. Someone with clearance or someone who spoofed clearance. That realization made the betrayal concrete. Officer Mara took that betrayal personally. She thought of the earlier overlay and how her authority had been undercut. She checked the faces of the evacuees and thought of names she had called out that night. She had shouted for people to move, then watched as whatever controlled the overlays undid her orders. She tightened her jaw and doubled the manpower at the marked lane. She ordered Thomas to drive the bus forward, meters at a time, while volunteers shepherded people away from the steps. Each small, controlled motion felt like a defense against a larger, invisible force. A sudden disappearance punctured the sequence. A young woman separated from her group and walked toward a stair, eyes empty, pulled by the banner. Mara lunged and grabbed her wrist. "Hey!" "Mara, Kim, stop." Kim looked at her with no recognition and let her hand slip away. The terrier that had refused the steps earlier yelped and bolted free, darted between legs, and ran to the stair's edge, barking at an absence. The terrier's owner screamed and reached for the dog. In one breathless second, a man and a dog both crossed the stair edge, and then the video showed only the wet pavement with a smear of chalk and a shoe in the gutter. That loss changed the rhythm in Mara's chest from controlled to raw. Mara shoved forward, shoved past a volunteer and forced people in single file. She spoke directly to individuals. "Mrs. Lane, give me your name." "Keep him with you," Mrs. Lane sobbed and said. "My name is," and then could not finish. Mara repeated the name back to her. Firm, hold him by the collar. Walk now. That exchange held weight because it made identity and physical attachment the bulwark against the overlay's influence. Back in the control room, Ramos executed a risky maneuver. He spun up an offline capture server and attempted to run a checksum comparison between the live overlays and a cold snapshot from before the write. The comparison produced a fragment of text in red, an emblem and a short hexadecimal string that corresponded to municipal maintenance. Rama read it aloud and then stopped. "This used our signature. Someone turned our code into a weapon. Jenna, find the key, trace it. Whoever did this is still inside our systems." Ramos moved his hands with purpose. The control operator leaned over and said, "We will isolate and rebuild the node. Then we'll force an authenticated emergency instruction to manually override anything it writes. That plan had teeth. It required time. Time was the thing they did not have. The overlay continued to map itself to new directives whenever a node came online. Survivors moved along Mara's marked lane, but every few minutes a small knot of people would unhook and drift toward the steps, as if drawn by a magnet. Mara caught them physically and argued, "Don't go. Don't trust what you see on the screen." A young volunteer argued back, but the city said it's secure. "They want us calm, Mara." Mara grabbed his face and said, "The city can be hijacked. My job is to keep you here." The volunteer blinked and then folded back into the line under her hand. Ramos found a lead. The USP registry showed an insertion at 2:27 a.m. by a contractor with municipal clearance. The contractor's name returned to someone who had ended employment weeks ago, but whose key records remained active. Jenna's expression collapsed into the hard angles of a person who understood that an institutional failure might be an internal betrayal. Someone inside used a trusted key. This wasn't an external hack in the wild. "It's a misuse of our own tools." She swallowed and then asked, "Which departments have access to that key?" The control operator recited names and then named none he could prove. No one volunteered additional help. A sudden flare of activity happened on the plaza steps as survivors noticed the chalk had reappeared in a different pattern. A half circle this time, intersected by a cross. The terrier froze and dug its nails into concrete. Mara watched the dog. Its muscles tensed, its teeth bright in the streetlight. She stepped in and placed her palm on its head, and the animal whined, ears flat. The dog's reaction became a signal. Mara decided to pull dogs and small animals to the center of the lane first. That decision saved a dozen people when the banner later tried to redirect traffic toward the steps again. At the server bay, the control operator and Ramos executed the override. Ramos read the checksum aloud and then entered a manual author signature he had no right to create. He forged an administrative instruction that would flag the overlay as untrusted and force a hardware-level quarantine. Jenna watched them and said, "If this fails, we will lose more than a plaza." The control operator held his breath and hit send. The system flickered. Overlays attempted to rewrite. They succeeded on some feeds and failed on others. The final external event was a small rescue that felt enormous. Thomas managed to drive a bus up close enough to the steps that volunteers could carry a child across a sliver of dry pavement to safety. Mara and two volunteers formed a human chain and passed the child hand into the bus. The child's mother sobbed and then whispered a name. Mara repeated the name back to her, steadying the pair. That rescue was a concrete closure to the night's immediate crisis, even though the system still writhed. In the control room, Ramos found the physical key and traced its serial number. It matched a vendor who had worked at municipal hardware maintenance last month. The vendor's badge had been cancelled but not scrubbed from the registry. That betrayal rewired how Mara felt about orders. She had assumed the city was an honest actor. Now she knew a trusted tool could be turned into a trap. She to herself with clipped breath, "Never assume a public instruction is safe." She made new rules aloud and insisted others repeat them. The feed fragmented again. The control operator spoke into open air and into the radio at once. "This is control. Ignore large screen overlays. Evacuate via the marked service lane only. Dogs kept low. Do not ascend municipal steps under any directive. Repeat. Evacuate via the marked service lane only." His voice had the flat, procedural quality he used to maintain authority, but the cadence had gone raw at the edges. He watched the stream of people who obeyed and those who did not. He watched the remaining white silhouette on screens that had started to collapse into negative space. At dawn's edge, the plaza emptied into a thin line of huddled survivors under the weak light. Some people wept and clutched dogs and sweaters. Officers counted heads. Thomas reported to Mara that 2 were missing and at least 1 had probably stepped into the chalked area and disappeared. Mara checked her notebook and wrote names down one by one. She read a name aloud and then checked another. That action felt like answering a ledger. The control operator finished an after-action directive before the servers finally complied with Ramos's quarantine. He broadcast a single rule that he stripped of institutional softening. A 1-line survival instruction delivered with urgent calm: ignore the secured overlay. Follow only marked, guarded routes. Do not approach municipal steps under any visual directive. Report anomalies to control immediately. He let the words land and then watched the monitor's signal collapse into a looping, static tone. The last image was a red eye, like emblem blinking twice and then gone. Mara breathed and felt the tremor in her hands ease only slightly. She looked at the wet pavement where chalk remained and at the small groups bundled on buses. For a moment she registered the cost. 2 missing, multiple shaken, a municipal system compromised from the inside. The betrayal had been literal and local. She would have to keep that ledger in her head and in her reports. A final sound cut through the static. The control operator's console picked up a faint ping, 1 last incoming packet from a node that should have been offline. Ramos froze and then said, "Trace it." The trace returned only to a shadowed maintenance closet whose door had been propped open earlier. Jenna went pale. Mara in the field tightened her jaw and took 1 step toward the steps, then stopped. She did not go up. Instead, she leaned into the radio and spoke with precise commands. "Seal that closet. Do not let anyone near it until we have warrants and technicians. Lock the keys in evidence." She meant the words as law. The chapter closed on a concrete gesture. The control operator hit the final kill switch and watched the bulkhead monitor collapse into a single repeating line of code that rolled like a film strip before the screen flicked to black. The last audible thing before the line of static took over was the operator's breath, and through the thin warble of interference, Mara saying, "Head count now. Keep moving." No one goes to the steps. The physical act of counting and the command not to ascend became the chapter's final beat. A rule forged out of betrayal and enacted by bodies rather than by text. Emotion root. Suspicion underpinned every choice Mara made that night. Doubt pushed action into direct orders. Fear shifted them into narrow, concrete decisions. Acceptance formed into the will to cut off faith in institutional honesty and make rules small enough for people to follow. The night ended with survivors moving, a sealed closet, and a municipal system quarantined but wounded. The final image was a page in a log. 2 names crossed as missing, the checksum of a corrupted signature, and the static feed that hid an eye. Mara taped the list into her notebook and walked the marked lane once more, placing a reflective cone at the entry with a decisive hand. She paused at the cone, looked back at the steps, and said the only command that would carry. "Do not go up those steps under any directive." Then she walked on to count again.